Imagine this. You wake up to the cold, sterile air of an alien prison. Your head throbs, a dull ache spreading through your skull as you try to recall what happened. The last thing you remember: gunfire, the deafening roar of explosions, the chaos of battle, then darkness. Now you're somewhere else. The walls aren't steel or concrete, but something organic, pulsing with a faint, sickly bioluminescence. A low hum vibrates through the floor, unsettlingly rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something alive. Then you realize you're not on Earth anymore. Your uniform is torn, stained with dried blood, a painful reminder of the fight that led you here. Around you, other soldiers, some unconscious, others staring blankly ahead, sit in silence. No one speaks, but their eyes say enough. They're waiting, processing, understanding the same horrifying truth. You've been captured, taken. You're prisoners of war. But war against who? Then, footsteps. Not human. A strange clicking, metallic and sharp, echoes down the corridor. A door slides open. Its motion is smooth, seamless, disturbingly silent. And then you see them, Cytherians. 7 feet tall, armored in segmented plating that shifts as they move, their eyes black and predatory, scanning the room with the cold efficiency of a predator evaluating prey. They don't speak, at least not in words. Instead, there's a wave of sensation, an intrusion in your mind, like icy tendrils scraping against your thoughts. It's how they communicate, not through sound, but through control. One of them steps forward, looking down at you like you're an insect beneath its clawed feet. And then, without a word, it turns and leaves. No orders, no threats. Why? Because they don't see a need for them. You're not a threat. Not to them. But that was their first mistake. Because here's the thing about humans: we don't stay prisoners for long. We adapt, we resist, we find a way to fight back, even when the odds are impossible. And what happens next? It isn't just escape, it's the beginning of something far greater. It's the story of how Earth soldiers turned captivity into conquest, and proved once and for all that humanity is not to be underestimated. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. When Earth first made contact with the wider galaxy, it wasn't peaceful, it wasn't diplomatic, it was brutal. The Cytherians weren't explorers, and they weren't interested in first contact. They were conquerors. To them, war wasn't just a means to an end, it was their way of life. Their empire had stretched across the stars for millennia, absorbing species, crushing civilizations, and bending entire worlds to their will. They saw Earth as nothing more than a resource, a planet rich in life, energy, and most importantly, a new species to enslave, study, and repurpose for war. The invasion came without warning. It was precise, calculated, and devastating. Their warships arrived in silence, bypassing our early warning systems as if they weren't even there. Within minutes, they disabled global communications, shutting down satellites, blinding entire nations before they even knew what was happening. Their attacks were swift and strategic, striking power grids, crippling military installations, sowing chaos before a single shot was fired in retaliation. And when they finally landed, it wasn't an army marching through city streets. It was something far worse. Their soldiers weren't mindless drones. They were living weapons, engineered to break resistance before it could begin. They didn't kill indiscriminately. They took prisoners. They separated leaders from their forces, soldiers from their weapons, entire populations from their homes. And those captured weren't just hostages. They were assets, test subjects, tools for something far more sinister. The first wave of captured soldiers were transported off-world before Earth even had a chance to organize a counterattack. They were taken to Cytherian warships, floating prisons in the void of space, where the strongest of conquered worlds were broken and reconditioned to serve. These ships weren't dungeons. They were laboratories. The Zetherians weren't just interested in physical strength. They wanted to understand the mind of a warrior. What made humans fight? What made them resist, even when resistance was futile? But the Zetherians had never dealt with humans before. They assumed Earth's warriors would break like all the others, that they would surrender, comply, and accept their fate. Instead, they adapted. They studied their captors just as intently as they were being studied. They watched, they listened, they learned, and they waited. Escape was impossible, or so it seemed. Every corridor was monitored, every door sealed with technology far beyond human understanding. The air itself carried subsonic waves meant to induce lethargy, slow the mind, break the will. But deep within the holding cells, something was happening. A handful of Earth's finest refused to be broken. They whispered in the dark, passing messages, sharing observations. They tested the limits of their prison. How long before the guards responded to movement? What happened if someone resisted? How did the Zetherians react to unpredictability? The first step to escape wasn't force. It was understanding the enemy, and the Zetherians, they had a weakness. Their ships were designed for efficiency, not security. Their technology was advanced, but their arrogance was greater. They relied on control, on psychological pressure, on breaking spirits before a single rebellion could take root. But humans, we don't break the way they expected, and so the rebellion began, not with weapons, not with violence, but with whispers, with strategy, with patience, and soon, very soon, the Zetherians would learn a lesson no species had ever taught them before. At first, the Zetherians didn't notice anything was wrong. Their captives remained where they were placed. They ate when they were told, moved when commanded, and stayed silent under watchful eyes. It was how all species responded in the early stages of captivity. Fear, compliance, the inevitable collapse of resistance. But what the Zetherians failed to understand was that silence was not surrender. The humans were studying their surroundings, gathering information piece by piece. They observed the way the lights dimmed at certain intervals, how the guards rotated their patrols, how some doors hissed open automatically while others required gestures or biometric scans. They took note of every technological quirk, every pattern, every inconsistency, and they tested. One soldier, Captain Elias Monroe, was the first to notice something strange. The Zetherians, despite their advanced minds, weren't as omniscient as they seemed. They didn't react to every movement with immediate precision. There were gaps in their surveillance, tiny moments where they relied too heavily on their automated systems instead of direct observation. So the prisoners experimented. One at a time, they would shift their weight, pretend to collapse, murmur words in their own language to see if their captors reacted. When nothing happened, they escalated, staring at a certain wall for long enough that a Zetherian guard finally took notice, as if something important was there. But there was nothing, just a blank surface. Yet the guard hesitated. It double-checked. It sent a signal to another. That was the first confirmation. Zetherians weren't as sure of themselves as they pretended to be. If a species was predictable, it was controllable. That was their philosophy. They had conquered countless worlds using this belief, turning resistance into submission through psychological dominance. But humans? Humans were not predictable. They were chaotic, irrational, or so it seemed. In reality, their unpredictability was a strategy in itself. The next step wasn't escape. It was infiltration. Monroe and the others didn't try to break out of their cells just yet. That would come later. First, they needed more information. The Zetherians used a unique form of communication, a neural link that connected them through an organic network embedded in the ship itself. No spoken language, no written symbols, just raw thought. That should have made their information secure. But there was a flaw. The network was instinctual. It wasn't encrypted like human systems. It worked because Zetherians trusted their own kind implicitly. They never expected a lesser species to understand, let alone manipulate it. But humans had something the Zetherians didn't. Curiosity. One prisoner, a combat engineer named Darius Cole, had an idea. If the Zetherians communicated through direct thought, then that meant their minds were constantly sending and receiving information, even subconsciously. It was like a radio frequency, always broadcasting. The prisoners couldn't hear it, but what if they could disrupt it? Cole started testing frequencies using nothing more than sound. Humans were naturally attuned to rhythm, to patterns. Music was proof of that. So he tapped his fingers against the walls, against the floor, creating steady beats, then breaking them, shifting between intervals. At first, it did nothing. But then, one of the Zetherian guards hesitated mid-step, its eyes flickering with momentary confusion. That was the second confirmation. The Zetherian's neural link was not infallible. It could be disrupted. From that moment on, the prisoners had an advantage. They refined their methods, using irregular breathing patterns, subtle hand movements, even controlled heartbeats to create dissonance within the Zetherian network. Individually, it was nothing, but together with enough soldiers acting in tandem, it was interference. Static in the system. The Zetherians grew uneasy. They couldn't understand why their prisoners seemed unaffected by the usual methods of control. The subsonic waves that should have dulled their willpower weren't working as expected. The behavioral patterns they relied on weren't appearing. Their captives weren't responding like any species they had encountered before. And then came the real test. Sergeant Ana Ramirez, a close-quarters combat specialist, faked a panic attack. She gasped, trembled, clutched her chest as if struggling to breathe. The Zetherians, confused by the unpredictability, sent in a medical drone. The instant the door hissed open, she struck, grabbing a panel off the machine and jamming it against the floor, short-circuiting its system. A tiny victory. The drone was destroyed, but the response was swift. Guards flooded the area, their glowing eyes scanning for any sign of coordinated action. But they saw nothing. The prisoners remained in their places, staring, silent, unmoving. The guards hesitated. They were advanced, but they were not infallible. If they couldn't understand an enemy, they couldn't anticipate them. And if they couldn't anticipate them, they feared them. The humans were testing the limits of their captors' patience, their strategies, their weaknesses. And the Zetherians, for the first time in centuries, were beginning to feel something they had long forgotten. Doubt. The final step before escape was securing a weapon. It wasn't going to be easy. Zetherians didn't carry traditional firearms. What need was there? When their species relied on mental control and bioelectrically activated weaponry, their armor was integrated into their physiology, their defense systems nearly impenetrable. But Cole had been watching. He noticed that, despite their advanced bodies, the Zetherians still relied on external interfaces to control certain ship functions. These interfaces weren't built with other species in mind. They assumed no prisoner would ever get close enough to use them. They assumed wrong. By carefully observing guard rotations, Monroe and the others identified a vulnerability. One Zetherian, slightly slower than the rest, had a delay in its reaction time, perhaps from an injury or age or something else entirely. It was the weak link in the chain. So, they set the trap. Ramirez started first, a faint groan, as if injured. Another soldier picked up the act, making it seem like something was wrong. The guards hesitated, waiting for the ship's automated medical system to respond. When nothing happened, they moved in to investigate. That was their last mistake. The moment the doors opened, the humans struck with precision. The weak link guard was the first to fall, overwhelmed in seconds. But they didn't kill him. They needed him. His armor, his interface, his access. For the first time since their capture, the prisoners had control over something. A suit, a system, an opportunity. The escape had begun. But escaping the cells was just the beginning. The real challenge? Taking the ship. And that was something no species had ever dared attempt before. The Zetherians had spent centuries perfecting their methods of control. Their ships weren't designed with prison breaks in mind, because in their eyes, escape wasn't possible. No species had ever resisted their neural suppression for long. No species had ever outmaneuvered their psychological warfare. No species had ever tried to take one of their warships from the inside. Until now. Captain Elias Monroe and his soldiers had made their first major move, subduing a guard, taking control of his armor, and gaining access to his interface. But that wasn't victory. That was just the first crack in the foundation. The warship still belonged to the Zetherians, and if they didn't act fast, that crack would seal itself before they could force it open. The humans worked quickly. The captured armor wasn't just plating. It was an extension of the Zetherians' body, linked directly to their biology. It responded to nerve signals, to thought commands, not to buttons or manual controls. A human couldn't just slip it on and walk through the ship unnoticed. But they didn't need to. Darius Cole, the combat engineer, had studied the way the Zetherians used their interfaces. Every action they took, every door they unlocked, every security barrier they activated, everything was controlled through a form of biological encryption. Their bodies emitted a unique energy signature, something no other species could replicate. That was their security, their failsafe, and that was their flaw. Because while humans couldn't generate that signal naturally, they could manipulate it. Cole got to work, using the damaged medical drone's components to build a crude bioemitter, a device that could mimic the Zetherian energy signature, fooling the ship's security systems into thinking they were one of their own. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't hold up under intense scrutiny. But it didn't have to. They just needed it to last long enough to get out of the detention sector and into the ship's core systems. Meanwhile, Monroe and Ramirez worked on another problem. The Zetherians were still unaware of what had happened. The guards who had responded to the fake injury had been taken down too quickly to send an alert. That gave them a few minutes, no more. Once the next patrol passed by and saw something was wrong, the entire ship would go into lockdown. They needed a diversion, so they created one. One of the prisoners, Lieutenant Mark Voss, was a demolitions expert. He didn't have access to explosives, but he understood structural weaknesses better than anyone. Zetherian warships were biomechanical, part machine, part living structure. They relied on internal circulatory systems to distribute energy and regulate temperature. That meant there were vital points, arteries of power that could be disrupted. Voss found one, a small, seemingly insignificant conduit running along the edge of their cell block. The Zetherians never considered it a security risk because no prisoner had ever been capable of exploiting it. Until now. Using a shard of the broken medical drone, Voss and Cole pried open the conduit and exposed the pulsing organic wiring beneath. Then, using nothing but a few strands of conductive fiber from the Zetherian armor, they created a feedback loop, overloading the ship's internal systems in that sector. The result? Chaos. Lights flickered, doors jammed, alarms blared. Not security alarms, but maintenance warnings, indicating a critical failure in environmental controls. To the Zetherians monitoring the ship's systems, it looked like a technical malfunction, something that required immediate attention. And that was exactly what the humans wanted. As the guards rushed to investigate the supposed breakdown, Monroe and his team moved. They slipped through the doors undetected, using the stolen armor's energy signature to bypass biometric scanners. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. They didn't run. They didn't panic. That would draw attention. Instead, they walked with purpose, mimicking the way their captors moved, relying on their stolen advantage for as long as it would last. They made it to an access tunnel, one of the many narrow, hidden pathways that ran beneath the ship's primary corridors. These tunnels weren't designed for human use. They were built for maintenance drones, for automated repairs. They were tight, dark, and filled with pulsing biomechanical structures that reacted to movement like a living organism. It was unsettling, but it was their only path forward. The team crawled through the tunnels, carefully navigating the twisting passageways until they reached their first objective, the Zetherian Armory. This was the real test. The Zetherians didn't use traditional weapons. Their technology was organic, designed to interface with their physiology. Their firearms weren't guns. They were living extensions of their bodies, symbiotic organisms that responded to Zetherian neural commands. A human couldn't just pick one up and fire it like a normal rifle. But again, they didn't need to. Cole examined the weapon racks, studying the way the firearms connected to their hosts. Each weapon had a small pulsating node, a biological lock that recognized the Zetherian nervous system. It was an intelligent safeguard, one that should have made it impossible for another species to use them. But the humans had already learned how to disrupt the Zetherian network. They still had the bioemitter. If they could tweak it, adjust the frequency just enough to mimic not just the armor, but the neural signature of a Zetherian itself, then they could trick the weapons into thinking they were being held by their rightful owners. It took minutes of careful calibration, of trial and error, of testing different frequencies, and then success. Ramirez picked up one of the weapons, and for the first time, it responded. The organic rifle pulsed, its bioluminescent veins shifting in color as it recognized the artificial signal. It was crude, unstable, but it worked. The humans were armed, and just in time. Because at that moment, the Gytherians finally realized something was wrong. A command pulse rippled through the ship, an invisible signal that all Zetherians could sense. Guards froze, their heads snapping toward unseen warnings. Patrols changed course. Security barriers activated. The illusion was over. The prisoners weren't just missing. They were loose, and the Zetherians weren't going to let that stand. Monroe and his team had only one option left. They couldn't run. They couldn't hide. They had to fight, and fight they did. The first wave of Zetherian guards charged into the armory, expecting panicked prisoners, weak and unarmed. Instead, they were met with coordinated gunfire, rifles that shouldn't have been functional in human hands, wielded with ruthless precision. The first guards fell in seconds, their plated bodies sparking as bioelectric pulses tore through them. The humans had trained for war their entire lives. The Zetherians had spent their existence subjugating weaker species. For the first time, they had encountered something stronger. The humans pushed forward, moving as a unit, cutting through the corridors like a blade through flesh. They didn't just escape the armory. They took it. And then, they did something the Zetherians had never considered possible. They turned their weapons on the ship itself. Targeting critical systems, Monroe's team systematically disabled Zetherian defenses, severing their captors' ability to coordinate. Hallways darkened as power conduits were destroyed. Control hubs flickered with dying light. Communications were jammed. The Zetherians had gone from captors to the captured. The humans weren't just escaping. They were taking the warship, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Zetherian warship trembled, its once untouchable corridors now a battleground. The humans had done the unthinkable, seized control of the armory, turned the Zetherians' own weapons against them, and crippled the ship's internal defenses. But the battle was far from over, because now, the Zetherians were fighting back. Low-frequency pulse rippled through the ship, something the humans couldn't hear, but they could feel it. It was a call to arms, a telepathic distress signal rallying every Zetherian on board. Their enemies weren't just coming. They were converging, moving as one, guided by a single, unbreakable hive-mind connection. Monroe and his team braced for impact. They had weapons, but they were still outnumbered. The Zetherians weren't mindless grunts. They were elite warriors, veterans of countless planetary conquests. They weren't just skilled, they were ruthless, and now they were angry. The first wave hit like a storm. The Zetherians didn't hesitate, didn't regroup, didn't hesitate to sacrifice themselves. They came in fast, bodies shifting and adapting mid-charge. Their armor wasn't just plating. It was alive, reacting to incoming fire, hardening against projectiles, shifting into razor-edged tendrils that lashed out like whips. But the humans, they were faster. Cole had already studied the Zetherians' armor, breaking down how it functioned. It was biomechanical, designed to protect against energy-based weaponry and kinetic impacts. But it had a weakness: frequency modulation. The armor adapted, but it did so in response to patterns. If the humans fired in predictable bursts, the armor would harden, deflecting the attacks. So they didn't fire in patterns. They alternated their shots, staggering their attacks in randomized sequences, never allowing the armor time to adjust. The Zetherians recoiled, their defenses failing against the unpredictable assault. What should have been an impenetrable wall crumbled in seconds. Ramirez moved like a ghost, ducking beneath a thrashing Zetherian and slamming the stock of her rifle into the soft tissue beneath its jaw. The creature spasmed as bioelectric feedback surged through its body. Monroe fired point-blank into another, the organic rifle sending a pulse of raw energy into its chest, tearing through its defenses, and still, they kept coming. The humans fought. As a unit, covering each other, adapting faster than the Githerians could recover. They weren't just warriors, they were soldiers. They had trained for this their entire lives. While the Zetherians relied on instinct and brute force, humanity relied on strategy, tactics, and raw, relentless willpower. For the first time in history, the Zetherians were losing, but they weren't done yet. As Monroe's team pushed forward, the ship itself fought back. Walls shifted, reshaping corridors into dead ends. Biomechanical vents released thick, choking fog, an airborne neurotoxin meant to paralyze anything without a Zetherian immune system. The humans had minutes before their lungs started shutting down. "Cole, fix it. Now!" Monroe barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Cole didn't hesitate. He tore open a control panel, ripping apart the pulsating wires inside. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was a living organism. And like any organism, it had pain receptors. He bypassed the environmental controls and sent a feedback surge directly into the ship's nervous system. The response was instant. The ship convulsed, its internal defenses overloading. The neurotoxin vents sealed shut. The walls, still shifting to trap them, suddenly locked in place, confused by the conflicting signals. Monroe didn't waste the opportunity. "Move!" The team surged forward, pushing deeper into the ship's core. They weren't just escaping anymore. They were taking control. Their next target, the bridge. The Zetherian command center was the heart of the warship, the nerve center that controlled everything, from weapons to navigation, from life support to communications. If they could take the bridge, they wouldn't just escape, they would own the ship. But the Zetherians weren't going to let that happen. As the humans neared the command sector, the corridors became a war zone. The Zetherians had regrouped, barricading the approach. Heavy armor units blocked the path, their plating reinforced, their weapons charged. These weren't just soldiers. These were the Zetherians' elite guard, the final line of defense. Monroe knew a frontal assault was suicide. They needed another way in. That's when Voss spotted it. A maintenance shaft leading directly into the bridge's lower levels. It was narrow, barely large enough to crawl through, but it bypassed the enemy's defenses entirely. There was just one problem. The shaft wasn't empty. A low, guttural chittering echoed from inside. The Zetherians didn't just rely on soldiers to protect their command center. They had something else. Something worse. The Cytheri. Monroe had seen them once before, during the Battle of Epsilon Prime. The Cytheri weren't Zetherians, not exactly. They were something else. Bioengineered war beasts, bred for one purpose: extermination. They moved like shadows, their bodies shifting between solid and liquid states, slipping through cracks, striking from angles no ordinary soldier could anticipate, and, now, they were in the humans' way. Monroe exchanged a glance with his team. No words needed to be said. They all knew what had to be done. They stepped into the darkness. The shaft was cold, unnervingly silent. The only light came from the bioluminescent veins running along the walls, casting eerie, pulsing shadows. The humans moved carefully, every breath controlled, every step calculated. Then, movement. The first Cythari struck from above, dropping. Like a liquid shadow, its form shifting as it lunged for Monroe's throat. He reacted instantly, firing his weapon at point-blank range. The energy pulse struck the creature mid-shift, forcing it back into solid form for a split second, just long enough for Ramirez to put a second shot through its skull. But there were more. The shadows came alive, writhing, twisting, attacking, from all angles. The team fought back, their weapons flashing in the darkness. Every shot timed, every movement precise. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And they did. One by one, the Cythari fell. Their advantage, stealth, unpredictability, meant nothing against human adaptability, against human defiance. Minutes later, the last creature collapsed, its form dissolving into lifeless black ooze. The path was clear. Monroe's team emerged from the shaft, stepping into the lower decks of the bridge. The Zetherian command center, loomed ahead, its entrance unguarded. The Zetherians hadn't expected anyone to make it this far. That was their final mistake. Monroe raised his weapon. "Let's finish this." The humans moved as one, stepping onto the bridge. And in that moment, the warship belonged to them. But the battle wasn't over yet, because the Zetherians had just activated their last, most devastating weapon, and the humans had seconds to stop it. The bridge was vast, larger than Monroe had expected. A sprawling command center, walls pulsating with bioluminescent veins, massive control nodes branching out like the neural pathways of a living brain. The air was thick with energy, vibrating with the hum of an intelligence that ran deeper than any machine. This wasn't just a ship, it was a living weapon, and it was resisting them. At the center of the bridge, the Zetherian commander loomed, a towering figure, encased in shifting plates of armor that rippled like liquid metal. Unlike the drones and soldiers they had fought before, this one wasn't just a warrior. It was something more. Its presence alone sent a pulse through the air, a telepathic wave designed to crush the minds of lesser beings. The humans felt it instantly, a pressure in their skulls, a static buzz crawling along their spines. Monroe clenched his jaw, fighting the instinct to drop his weapon, to fall to his knees. It was a mental assault, pure and relentless. The Zetherians didn't just wage war physically, they attacked the mind. Ramirez staggered, gripping her, rifle like a lifeline. Voss growled, shaking his head, his fingers twitching over the trigger. Cole's eyes darted across the bridge, searching for weak points, anything they could use. Then Monroe spoke, his voice cutting through the suffocating mental pressure. "Fight it." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of human defiance. They had suffered before. They had endured worse. Pain was nothing new to them. The Zetherian commander tilted its head, observing. Testing them. The pressure intensified. A silent challenge. Submit or be destroyed. The humans answered with gunfire. The first shot slammed into the Zetherians' armor and did nothing. The plating absorbed the impact, rippling as if mocking them. Monroe adjusted his aim, firing again, this time at the creature's joints. The armor shifted too fast, adapting before the shot could land. Then the commander moved. It didn't charge. It didn't lunge. It simply stepped forward. One smooth motion, faster than the eye could track. Monroe barely dodged in time as a blade-like appendage slashed through the air where his head had been. The strike hit the console behind him, slicing through reinforced alloys like wet paper. Voss fired, his shots hammering into the creature's side. But again, nothing. Ramirez flanked, aiming for the head, only for the Zetherian to twist unnaturally, dodging as if it had predicted her attack before she even pulled the trigger. Cole was already moving, sprinting toward the command terminals. He wasn't here to fight, he was here to take control. If he could break into the ship's systems, override the neural core, they wouldn't need to win this fight. The ship itself would do it for them. But the Zetherian knew. With a flick of its wrist, the ship responded. The walls shifted, barriers forming between Cole and the controls, sealing off access points. The Zetherians weren't just connected to their technology. They were their technology. They were fighting a war against an enemy that could rewrite the battlefield in real time. And then, the ship's final weapon came online. A deep, resonating hum filled the bridge. Lights dimmed. The air vibrated with power. The humans didn't need to see it to know what was happening. The ship was preparing to self-destruct. Not a conventional explosion. No, that would be too easy. The Zetherians had something worse, a collapse drive. If it activated, the ship wouldn't just explode. It would implode. A gravitational singularity, consuming everything within a 100,000-kilometer radius. And Earth's fleet was right in the blast zone. They had minutes to stop it. Cole worked faster, his fingers flying over the organic interface, his mind racing to decode a language that wasn't meant for human comprehension. Monroe and the others had no choice. They had to keep the Zetherian commander busy. "Voss! Aim for the environment!" Monroe shouted. Voss didn't hesitate. His next shots weren't aimed at the commander. They were aimed at the consoles around it. Panels exploded, sparks flying, disrupting the ship's systems. The walls flickered, the neural connection destabilizing. The commander flinched. That was all Monroe needed. He lunged, a combat knife in one hand, his rifle in the other. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the joints, the spaces between plates, the biological seams that couldn't shift fast enough. The blade sank in. The Zetherian screeched, not in pain, not in fear, in rage. It retaliated instantly, its arm slamming into Monroe, sending him flying across the bridge. He hit the ground hard, the impact rattling his bones. But he grinned through the pain, because he had heard it. Ramirez followed up, her shots now striking with purpose. She wasn't aiming to kill. She was aiming to disrupt, to break the Zetherian's perfect fluid motion. Every bullet was a calculated interruption, forcing the creature to adapt too fast. And then, Cole got in. The ship's neural system stuttered. The walls flickered, the barriers dropping. The Zetherian commander stiffened, as if it felt the invasion. It turned to Cole, and Cole smiled. Checkmate. He sent a single command, one that reversed the self-destruct sequence. Instead of collapsing, inward, the ship expanded. Energy surged outward, disrupting the Zetherian's neural connection. For the first time in its existence, it was disconnected, and that made it vulnerable. Monroe didn't hesitate. He pulled his knife free, flipped it in his grip, and drove it straight into the creature's throat. The Zetherian spasmed, its body convulsing. For a moment it tried to fight back, but without its connection to the ship, without the constant stream of data guiding its every move, it was just another body, and then it collapsed. The bridge fell silent. Cole exhaled, his hands still hovering over the controls. We have the ship. Monroe pushed himself to his feet, breathing heavily. Then let's use it. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. The Zetherians had taken humans as prisoners of war. Now, the war belonged to humanity, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. The ship was theirs, but the war was far from over. Monroe and his team stood in the aftermath, the Zetherian commander's corpse cooling on the bridge floor. The vast chamber, once pulsing with an alien intelligence, was now eerily silent. Cole remained at the control interface, his fingers hovering over the glowing bioorganic panels. The ship was still resisting him, its systems rewriting themselves in an effort to purge his intrusion. This thing's fighting me every step of the way, he muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. It's like trying to hold on to a writhing snake that's also hacking your brain. Ramirez wiped blood from her brow. We just killed their top officer. If they're anything like us, the rest of the fleet is scrambling right now. Command structure's broken. This is our window. Monroe stepped forward. Then we don't waste it. We turn this ship against them. Cole, can you override their comms? Cole hesitated. Then his eyes flicked to Monroe, understanding dawning. You want to send a message. Not just any message. Monroe's expression darkened. I want every Zetherian in this sector to hear our voices. I want them to know exactly what's coming. Cole smirked. I like the way you think, sir. He cracked his knuckles and dove into the alien interface, bypassing firewalls, redirecting power, and twisting the ship's own neurological pathways against it. The process was agonizingly slow, but then, connection established. The entire Zetherian fleet was now listening. Monroe stepped up to the console, his voice like steel. This is Commander Monroe of Earth's military. To every Zetherian who can hear me, we are no longer your prisoners. We are no longer your cattle. We have taken your ship. We have killed your commander. And we are coming for all of you. For a brief second, there was no response. Then a transmission crackled through, an alien voice, layered and distorted, yet still laced with something dangerously close to fear. You cannot win this war. Monroe didn't even blink. We already have. Cole cut the transmission. A long silence followed. Then, alarms blared across the bridge. Red warning glyphs appeared on the control nodes. Cole swore under his breath. They're adapting. Their fleet just went on high alert. Ramirez tightened her grip on her rifle. Let them. We still have control of this ship, right? Cole hesitated. Yes, but not for long. The neural core is rejecting my overrides. In a few minutes, this thing's going to lock us out completely. Monroe's mind raced. They had to act now. Can you make the ship jump? Cole blinked. You mean, activate its FTL drive? Exactly. Can you do it? Cole exhaled sharply, fingers flying over the interface. I can try. But if this thing isn't fully under my control, we could end up anywhere. Inside a star, a black hole, hell, even outside the galaxy. We don't have a choice. Monroe turned to the others. We take this ship, we break their lines, and we use every weapon on board to burn them down before they regroup. Voss cracked his knuckles. Now that is a plan I can get behind. Cole's hands flew over the controls. All right, prepping FTL, but this isn't going to be smooth. The ship shuddered violently as energy surged through its core. Monroe grabbed onto a support beam as the hum of the engine grew into a deafening roar. The walls pulsed erratically, the organic material reacting, like a living organism being forced to perform an unnatural act. Then, the ship lurched, space folded, reality twisted, and suddenly, they were somewhere else. The view from the bridge changed in an instant, no longer surrounded by the Cytherian fleet. They were now on the fringes of a vast cosmic battlefield. Wreckage floated in the void, both human and alien ships, their twisted remains a testament to the carnage that had taken place here. And at the center of it all, Earth's fleet, or what remained of it. Cole's eyes widened. Oh. Hell. Monroe clenched his jaw. Get me a status report, now. Ramirez was already scanning the ship's sensors. Multiple Earth vessels still operational, but they're outnumbered at least 3-1. The Zetherians have them surrounded, Voss growled. We need to get in there, now. But Cole was shaking his head. We can't. Not yet. This ship still doesn't fully recognize me as its pilot. If we charge in now, it could shut down mid-battle. We have to stabilize the neural link first. Monroe's frustration boiled over. We don't have time for that. Our people are dying. Then a voice crackled through the comms, human this time. Weak, barely holding on, but unmistakable. This is the UEGS, GK, relentless. To any Earth forces, anyone out there. Static overtook the signal for a moment, then, we are still fighting. We will fight until our last breath, but we need backup. The message cut out. Silence. Monroe's fists clenched. Ramirez swallowed hard. What's the call, sir? A million thoughts raced through Monroe's head. They had a ship, a powerful one, but unstable. They had weapons, but not full control. Charging in was suicide, but doing nothing, unacceptable. He took a deep breath. We do this smart. We do this human. He turned to Cole. Give me anything that works. Weapons, shields, even just an opening in their formation. Cole worked frantically, overriding failsafes, pushing the ship's systems to their limit. All right, I can give you a weapons boost. One good blast before the ship locks up. Again. After that, we're back to square one. Monroe nodded. That's all I need. He turned to the others. We take the shot, we break their formation, and then we fight like hell. Voss grinned. Just another day in paradise. Ramirez exhaled. Let's finish this. Monroe stepped forward, gripping the controls. Before him the Zetherian fleet loomed, surrounding Earth's last hope. No more running, no more being hunted. Now, the hunters had arrived. Fire. The Zetherian battleship, humanity's new weapon, roared to life, unleashing a storm of destruction. Unlike anything the enemy had ever seen. And the war shifted. The Zetherian fleet never saw it coming. One moment, they had Earth's last remaining ships cornered, their formation tightening for the final slaughter. The next, an apocalyptic wave of energy ripped through their ranks. A single shot, fired from their own battleship now under human control, detonated with the fury of a dying star. The lead Zetherian dreadnought took the full impact. Its shields collapsed in an instant, its organic armor shriveling as the ship's body convulsed like a living creature in its death throes. A second later, the warship erupted from within, shattered, torn apart by the very power it had once wielded against countless conquered civilizations. And then, all hell broke loose. Earth's fleet, battered and bleeding, saw the opening, and surged forward. The battered relentless, its hull cracked but its spirit unbroken, unleashed its railguns, shredding through enemy fighters. The Dawnbreaker, a carrier barely holding itself together, launched every last drone and torpedo in its arsenal. Humanity had been on the verge of annihilation just moments before. But now they had a chance. Monroe didn't waste a second. Cole. Status. Cole's fingers danced across the alien interface, his breath coming in quick gasps. That shot, fried half. Our systems. I can still fire manually, but we've got maybe one more good attack before this ship completely shuts us out. Monroe nodded. Then we make it count. The Zetherians were already scrambling to recover. The momentary shock of seeing their own warship turn against them was fading, replaced by cold, calculated fury. The remaining dreadnoughts reoriented themselves, shields reinforcing as they began charging their own superweapons. Ramirez's voice was urgent. We need to take out their flagship. If we don't, they'll wipe us out before we can do any real damage. Monroe's eyes locked onto the largest vessel in the fleet, a monstrous, planet-black leviathan bristling with weaponry. The Zetherian High Command had to be on board. Destroying that ship wouldn't just be a victory, it would be a death blow to their entire invasion force. Can you get me a direct shot? Monroe asked. Cole hesitated. Maybe, but it's not just about aiming. This ship, it's fighting me harder than ever. It knows what we're doing. Monroe didn't blink. Then we override it the old-fashioned way. He turned to Voss and Ramirez. Find whatever power conduits you can. Rip them apart if you have to. If this ship is rejecting Cole's commands, we'll force it to obey us. The two soldiers didn't question him. They sprinted into the corridors, weapons drawn, heading for the exposed alien infrastructure deep within the ship. Meanwhile, outside, the battle raged on. Earth's forces were clawing their way to victory, with sheer determination, but the Gytherians were still the dominant force. More and more human ships were being destroyed, the debris of their shattered hulls joining the graveyard of wreckage in space. And then, the Zetherian flagship fired. A blast of pure annihilation erupted from its core, slicing through space with terrifying precision. The Relentless never stood a chance. Monroe could only watch as the mighty battleship, one of Earth's last, was enveloped in white-hot destruction. The explosion consumed it, a shockwave of energy scattering the remaining human ships. A few managed to evade, but many didn't. The loss was immeasurable. A voice cracked through the comms, desperate, defiant. They got us, sir. But, we took some of them with us. Give 'em hell. The transmission cut out. Ramirez's voice came through the ship's internal comms a second later. We're almost there, sir. Just hold on. Monroe's hands clenched into fists. Cole, get that damn weapon online, Cole gritted his teeth. Almost there! In the heart of the ship, Ramirez and Voss finally reached their target. An enormous pulsating core, the Zetherian equivalent of a reactor. The alien structure fought against them, tendrils snapping at their armor, trying to repel the invaders. Voss didn't hesitate. He ripped a grenade from his belt, yanked the pin, and slammed it into the core's writhing surface. This ought to convince it. The explosion rocked the ship. The neural core screeched, an unholy sound, something neither mechanical nor organic, but a horrific blend of both. And then, the ship yielded. Cole gasped as the controls suddenly unlocked beneath his fingertips. Holy hell! They did it. Monroe didn't hesitate. Target the flagship. Everything we've got. Cole's hands flew across the controls, locking onto the enemy vessel. The Zetherians must have realized what was happening because the flagship's energy signatures spiked. They were about to fire again. This was it. Monroe's voice was steady. Do it! Cole slammed his palm down. The Zetherian warship screamed as the captured battleship unleashed its final act of defiance. A beam of devastation ripped across space, a perfect, focused line of obliteration. It struck the flagship dead center, tearing through its hull, shattering its core, rupturing every system within. For one agonizing moment, the massive behemoth lingered, as if refusing to accept its fate, and then it imploded. The blast wave sent shockwaves through the Zetherian fleet. The remaining ships, leaderless, stunned, began faltering. Earth's forces, sensing blood in the water, pressed forward with everything they had left. The tide had turned. But inside the captured battleship, alarms blared. Cole's face paled. Bad news, sir. I think the ship's dying." Monroe barely had time to react before the floor beneath them lurched. The vessel was breaking apart, its systems collapsing from the strain. "Evac now!" Monroe shouted. The team sprinted for the escape pods. Ramirez and Voss reappeared, covered in soot and alien residue, but very much alive. They reached the launch bay as sections of the ship detached, torn away by uncontrolled explosions. They barely made it. The moment their pod ejected, the battleship finally succumbed. The vessel that had once been a symbol of Zetherian dominance, of human enslavement, was now nothing but a burning carcass drifting into the abyss. Monroe exhaled slowly, watching from the viewport as the tide of battle shifted completely. The Azetherians were retreating. What had been a massacre had turned into a desperate escape. They were the ones fleeing now. Earth had survived. No, Earth had won. But as Monroe sat back, exhaustion weighing on him, a single thought remained. This wasn't the end. The Zetherians wouldn't forget what happened here. They wouldn't stop, and neither would humanity. They had been prisoners once, but never again. And that was how humanity turned the tide. But what happens next? Do the Zetherians retaliate? Does Earth strike first? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget, HFY Chronicles-849 is just getting started. Hit that subscribe button because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.